The day three NASA engineers walked into a dusty roadside garage, everyone in town expected them to laugh. After all, the man working beneath the faded metal sign had spent years being called a junk mechanic, a nobody who repaired machines other people had already given up on. But that afternoon, something happened that nobody in that little town could have imagined. The same people who once pointed at his rusty tools would soon stand silently as one of the most respected engineering teams in the country asked him for help. Before we begin, if you believe everyone deserves kindness, respect, and a second chance, please like this video, share it with someone who needs encouragement, leave a comment, and subscribe to Kindness Corner. Sometimes the person everyone overlooks is carrying a talent nobody has taken the time to notice. His name was Calder Voss, a 47-year-old mechanic who owned a small garage at the edge of a quiet American town. The garage had peeling blue paint, a crooked roof, 2 old hydraulic lifts, and shelves crowded with parts that most people would have thrown away years earlier. There were cracked gauges, worn gears, broken circuit boards, rusty bolts, old engine components, and boxes of mysterious pieces Calder had collected because he believed that almost nothing was truly useless. To the people passing by, it looked like a junkyard pretending to be a repair shop. Calder didn't mind. He had learned long ago that people often judged a man's worth by the shine of his building instead of the work of his hands. Every morning, he opened the garage shortly after sunrise. Daylight poured through the wide front doors and illuminated floating dust above the concrete floor. He would make coffee, check his tools, and begin working before the rest of town had finished breakfast. His hands were rough, his work shirt was usually stained with grease, and a thin silver streak ran through his dark hair. Yet his eyes were unusually observant. Calder could listen to an engine for 10 seconds and often tell where the problem was before opening the hood. That ability had once made him proud. Then life changed. Years earlier, Calder had worked for a major manufacturing company as a maintenance technician. He had designed small improvements that saved machines from overheating and had repeatedly solved problems that engineers had struggled with. But after a corporate restructuring, his position disappeared. Calder was offered a different job several states away, but he refused because he had promised his young daughter, Maris, that he would never make her leave the town where she had grown up. So he opened the garage. Business was slow. People brought him old trucks, farm equipment, generators, and machines nobody else wanted to touch. Calder charged less than the larger repair shops because he knew many of his customers were struggling themselves. Sometimes people paid him with cash, sometimes with vegetables, eggs, or a promise to pay later. That generosity became another reason people underestimated him. One afternoon, 2 wealthy customers stood outside the garage laughing while Calder repaired an aging delivery truck. One of them glanced at the piles of discarded components around the building and jokingly called him a junk mechanic. Calder heard it. He simply lowered his eyes and continued working. His daughter, Maris, was standing nearby. She was 22 by then and had inherited her father's curiosity. She looked at him, expecting anger, but Calder only wiped his hands on a cloth. He told her that people could call him whatever they wanted. The important thing was knowing who you were when nobody was watching. Those words stayed with her. Months later, Calder received a strange phone call. The caller introduced herself as Dr. Syra Quill, an aerospace systems engineer working with a private research team contracted on a specialized NASA project. Calder initially thought it was a prank. The woman explained that her team had been experiencing a persistent mechanical problem with a testing assembly. They had tried multiple solutions, but one component continued behaving unpredictably under certain conditions. Someone had recommended Calder. He nearly laughed. He asked how an aerospace engineering team had even heard of a small-town mechanic. Syra explained that one of Calder's former customers had a relative working with their team. That person had mentioned an unusual repair Calder had performed years earlier on a precision industrial machine. The repair had apparently worked so well that the story had eventually reached people who knew what kind of problem he had solved. Calder agreed to meet them, but he made one thing clear. If they expected a miracle, they had the wrong man. The next morning, 3 engineers arrived at his garage. Syra stepped out first, followed by Dr. Renzo Vale and Mara Ellison, both carrying equipment cases. They were dressed professionally, but the moment they entered Calder's garage, they looked completely out of place among the old engines and shelves of salvage parts. Several townspeople noticed the visitors. Whispers spread quickly. The junk mechanic had important visitors. Inside, Syra showed Calder technical diagrams and explained the problem. A precision mechanical assembly used in their testing environment was producing inconsistent movement under a specific combination of temperature, vibration, and load. Their team had already examined the obvious causes. Calder studied the diagrams without speaking. He asked questions, then more questions. He wanted to know how the component behaved before the failure, what sounds the machinery produced, what temperature changes occurred, and whether the problem happened immediately or after prolonged operation. The engineers answered. Calder walked to a shelf. He picked up an old metal bearing housing, then another component. Then he stopped. He explained that the problem might not be the component everyone was testing. It could be a tiny interaction between two parts that behaved normally individually, but differently when environmental conditions changed. The engineers exchanged glances. Calder asked for the failed assembly. They brought it inside. For the next several hours, the garage became an unlikely laboratory. Sunlight streamed through the windows while Calder carefully examined the mechanism. There was no dramatic speech, no magical shortcut, and no impossible discovery. There was simply a man who understood machines differently because he had spent decades listening to them. He noticed a microscopic alignment issue that had been overlooked during previous inspections. But he didn't stop there. He explained that correcting the alignment alone might create another problem. Instead, he suggested a small redesign using a more resilient mounting arrangement and a material combination that could better handle repeated changes in temperature and vibration. Renzo stared at the mechanism. He asked Calder how he had noticed it. Calder shrugged. He said machines always tell you what is wrong if you are patient enough to listen. The engineers tested his idea. The first result was inconclusive. Calder didn't panic. He adjusted one measurement. They tested again. This time, the readings improved. The engineers ran another series of tests. The results improved again. For the first time that day, the garage became completely silent. Syra looked at Calder with genuine respect. She told him that his approach had identified something their team had repeatedly overlooked. Calder smiled quietly. He didn't celebrate. Instead, he asked whether the engineers wanted to try one more adjustment. That final adjustment produced the most stable result they had seen. Word spread quickly. The same people who had called Calder a junk mechanic began showing up outside his garage. Some wanted to shake his hand. Others simply wanted to see what the fuss was about. Calder didn't change. He still opened the garage every morning. He still repaired old trucks. He still helped customers who couldn't afford expensive repairs. But something inside him had changed. For years, he had believed that being overlooked was something he simply had to endure. Now he realized that his value had never depended on whether other people recognized it. A few weeks later, Syra returned with an offer for Calder to consult with the engineering team on future mechanical challenges. Calder was surprised. He asked why they wanted him. Syra smiled and explained that technical knowledge could be taught, but patience, curiosity, creativity, and the ability to see possibilities inside discarded things were much harder to teach. Calder accepted, but he continued running his little garage. One Saturday afternoon, he noticed a teenage boy standing outside, staring through the open garage door. The boy had been struggling at school and believed he wasn't smart enough to become an engineer. Calder invited him inside. He handed him an old broken mechanism. Instead of telling him how to fix it, Calder asked him what he noticed. The boy studied it. Slowly, he began asking questions. Calder smiled. That was how it had started for him too. Not with a prestigious laboratory. Not with expensive equipment. Just curiosity. And someone willing to give him a chance. Years later, people in town still remembered the day NASA engineers walked into Calder Voss's garage. But Calder remembered something different. He remembered every person who had doubted him, every customer who had trusted him, every difficult morning when he almost gave up, and every small decision that kept him moving forward. His garage never became a luxury building. The old sign remained above the door. The shelves were still filled with salvaged parts. The floor still carried marks from years of work. But the words junk mechanic no longer sounded like an insult. To Calder, they became a reminder. Because sometimes what other people throw away is exactly what someone else needs to build something extraordinary. And sometimes the person everyone considers ordinary is simply waiting for the right moment to show the world what he has always been capable of. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who has ever been underestimated, and subscribe to Kindness Corner. Your support helps stories like this reach people who may need a little hope today. And before you leave, please comment, "Everyone deserves a second chance," if you believe we should judge people by their character, effort, and kindness, not by their appearance, background, or the size of their garage. Because Calder's greatest lesson was never about machines. It was about people. Never underestimate someone because of where they work, what they own, or how quietly they live. The world is full of hidden talent, unfinished dreams, and people who only need one person to believe in them. Sometimes, all it takes is one open door. And for Calder Voss, that door happened to belong to a little garage everyone else had already dismissed.